This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt PureTube microphone through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show, and there's some great deals waiting for you there. Now get ready to rock.
Most of the time when I like to record heavy, big, modern, high-gain stuff, I don't use a lot of compression or any at all on the guitars. Even in the mix stage, I won't put it on there because I don't feel like it needs it. Sometimes I'll use a compressor just for a tonal thing. Like, it might not even be doing any gain reduction, but it's adding some sort of character, like an 1176 or LA2A or something like that.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey, Rockstar, come on over here. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off over at isotope.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, rock stars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Nathan Yarborough, a heavy rock and metal music producer, engineer, and mixer who started out in North Carolina with the Tascam 4-track, studying recording in college and finding his way to Nashville to intern at Sony, Tree, and Blackbird Studios, where he then continued to work for the next 8 years with some of the greatest engineers like Vance Powell, Niko Bolas, George Massenburg, Joe Chiccarelli, and many others. He then went on to engineer records for producer Nick Raskulinecz for 10 years, and now he works with a variety of bands at all different levels to make great recordings right here in Nashville, Tennessee. I met Nathan recently at the 25th Annual Audio Masters Benefit Golf Tournament. That's a sentence I thought I'd never say out loud. When we stopped at hole number ? That was sponsored by the Nashville Recording Supply Company.
Right.
And Nathan was there. And I ended up coming home with a crappy golf score, but a brand new spanking roll of black gaff tape for the studio and an amazing playlist of Nathan's discography of hard rock and metal albums to check out, including artists like Korn, Mastadon, Glasswalker, Code Orange, and Evanescence, to name just a few of the big name bands you might No. So please give a listen to that in the show notes below. It is some awesome sounding stuff. Thanks also to Adam Dalton and Eric Massey for making our introduction. Please welcome Nathan Yarborough to Recording Studio Rockstars. Nathan, are you ready to rock, my man?
I am.
Did I pronounce your last name right? I hope I did.
Yes.
All right. Because I was like, would I say Yarborough? I don't think it's not like
I mean, it works.
It works. You know, Nathan is my brother's name.
Oh, is it? It's a good name.
I forgot to tell you that. It's a very good name. If you're listening, Nate, shout out to you. So welcome to the podcast studio, man. It's great to have you here. Rockstars, we're joining you all right now from my brand new podcast studio here in the house. I've got the studio, and then one day I was like, you know what? I need a dedicated space just for the podcast.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it for a long time.
Yeah, me too, man.
Been an avid listener for a long time.
You know, and thanks for helping me out. When Nathan sat down, I thought, well, he's an engineer who's got great ears. So let me try seeing what it sounds like if the door is open or closed, and he tells me if it sounds better where he's sitting. We went with the closed door and the
right. We could have gone down a whole rabbit hole with that situation.
Yeah.
We'd be here next week. What about a halfway crack?
Exactly.
Like
you're trying to look for the perfect sound in your home studio space. Didn't you just mention that you're working on some panels yourself?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm struggling with a tiny room at my house, you know, and just hanging panels here. What does that do? What does this do? It's just it's a process.
So you got a great story, of course, which probably has brought you to the present where you're talking about your home studio situation. Tell us a little bit about your studio, and then we'll hear more about your backstory.
I mean, it's not really a studio. It's just a room in my house with a computer and speakers. I mean,
that's so uncommon.
To me, it's not a studio because I grew up in, big studios. So it's just like, I've got enough to get stuff done if I need to.
Yeah.
Which is a necessity.
Are you mostly mixing?
At home, yeah. Mixing and editing.
Mixing and editing, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to track a record or produce something, you start out in a studio.
Yeah, I try to. It just depends on the band, whatever finances they have will determine where we record.
Yeah. All right, well, let's back up and give us a little bit of a story arc to you, the brief version of, starting out in music and then finding yourself in some pretty incredible studios in Nashville,
right,
to where you're at now.
So, I mean, I grew up in North Carolina in a small town right north of Charlotte. And, I played music from a young age. I played piano, I played saxophone, and I decided those weren't cool instruments to play. So I wanted to play.
But they are.
Well, now that I know that now, later in life, but at the time, I was like, I want to play guitar. I want to play electric guitar.
Where in North Carolina?
It was a town called Davidson, which is right north of Charlotte. It's like 20 miles up I-77. So I wanted to play guitar. I got a guitar for Christmas one year, and then, my parents were like, well, you got to take lessons. So there was a local guy in town that I took lessons from, and his big thing was, well, you got to write songs. And if you're going to write songs, you got to record them somehow. So, and he was always trying to sell me stuff. So he sold me his 4-track machine. And
that's where you got your Tascam?
Yeah. And so he sold me that and a little Mackie mixer. And
was he like, I'm getting rid of this old cassette thing and getting a computer?
Well, I think he was always moving on to the next thing. So whenever he wanted something different, he would sell what he had. And, I think he was going to get an 8-track or something.
Yeah.
And
I need to learn that lesson. I tend to keep all the old
right.
stuff.
I don't think I've ever sold one single thing. I still have all this stuff.
Yeah. You're smothering in the gear.
Right. And it's not good gear. It's just like stuff you would never even want to use. But so I just started, okay, I've got this little idea. I didn't know how to use, I knew how to dump tracks 1 through 3 to track 4 and then, build it up that way. And, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know you could punch in.
So your machine, the Tascam, would let you punch in?
Right. But I didn't know that was a thing. So every time I would mess up, I would start back over the beginning.
I think I have like a Yamaha now, 4-track still. And for some reason, when I tried to use it, I was like, there didn't seem to be an ability to punch in. And I'm like, what?
Oh, right.
I couldn't believe that. But maybe some of them didn't punch in, and maybe I just didn't figure it out yet.
Right. I'm not sure. I know that I discovered later in life that this one would punch in. And I was like, oh, really? But so, I had that, and then I started, you meet friends that play music. And so I played in little bands in the Charlotte area, and, we recorded. I was a guy, me and one of my other friends both had 4 tracks. So we would both record the band and make our demos. And that was the way we got shows. And, I really didn't think much of the recording thing. I wanted to be in a band.
Yeah. Well, it's a good music scene there. Like that right there, the Tri-Cities area, right? Is really good.
And when we were coming up, we could go to a show every single weekend. And like the guys that were playing, there was a lot of really good bands in like heavy rock bands. So it was exciting to us. And, we're these little kids just hounding these older rock, like, hey, check out our tape, So we did that. And then it got to the point where, okay, I'm graduating from high school, and what am I going to do? Am I going to, because my parents kept telling me, your band's not going to go anywhere.
Did they come from a music background? Did they have some understanding of it, or
not really? But they were always super supportive of it.
Yeah, they just wanted you to get a real job.
Kind of.
and do well.
I think it was put to me that, well, if you stay here, you got to get a job. If you don't go to college, you got to get a job. So I decided, well, I'll go to college. And then it's like, well, what are you going to do in college? What are you going to study? So my backup plan was, I kind of like this recording thing. I heard you could go for that.
That's awesome.
So I didn't know I needed a backup plan for the backup plan. But, so I went to school. I went to Appalachian State University, and they had a small recording program.
Yeah, I had an intern from there. Went by the nickname PB and the Jam. I've been surprised to hear that there's a good creative music program coming out of it.
Yeah, and it was really cool because it's run out of the music department. So you have to be a music major. You have to audition for the music school.
Yeah.
And you have to major in an instrument. Of course, I'll do guitar, but I didn't know I had to do jazz guitar. So then I had to learn, well, what's jazz music? I don't know what jazz music is. So then I fell in love with jazz music. And when I was there, I joined a steel drum band that was there. And
that's cool.
Played in that for a couple years.
That's cool. So did you play steel drums?
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
So, that whole experience opened up the whole world music scene.
Give us a very brief tutorial on steel drums. Like, how does that thing work? Is it just like a 12 note scale right there in front of you? You can play anything?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a chromatic instrument. It's, they were made, originally, like if you go all the way back, originally because they come from a place called Trinidad and Tobago, which is a country like 17 miles north of Venezuela. And originally there were these gangs that would, it was basically like war. They would have, but when they went to battle each other, I guess you could call it, they would beat pieces of bamboo on the ground in different lengths, and those created different pitches. So that was like a thing. Well, then that, with the introduction of like the oil companies that started mining oil, because there's a lot of oil in that area.
Yeah.
They started finding these 55-gallon drums, that were discarded. And so then they moved away from the bamboo thing to somebody first. I can't remember if it was convex first or concave, but they figured out they could hammer different portions of these barrels into different pitches.
Wow.
So with the modern drum, like you have different classes in an orchestra, you have different sets of drums. So like the main lead pan is what they call it. It has a full chromatic scale on 1, and I think it's like 3 octaves.
That's such a trip. Yeah, I could see how like somebody would have stumbled on an oil drum and you hit it and you're like, that sounds cool. And then
Right.
you find another one that's been like bent, in an area. So it's like split into two little parts. You're
Right.
like, ooh, they sound like different pitches. Next thing you know, you're figuring it all out.
It's crazy to go down there because it's such a part of the culture, and these kids are raised with this instrument. It's just expected.
That's wild, man. So,
and so you go down there and you look and you see people playing and you're like, I'll never be that good.
Yeah. So there's immediately, I feel like there's a correlation. So the music that you make now, these records that are in your playlist, bands like Code Orange, which to me sounds like dubstep for heavy metal,
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, it's like powerful. It comes at you fast. And then there are moments that come and go really quickly, and they're intense. And it's like there's an appreciation for complex overtones, And like immediately I think of that when I think of steel drums. So that's interesting that there was like, that's your background.
Yeah, I've never put those two things together, but yeah, I mean, you're totally right. That band in particular, I mean, they're really amazing at doing that.
Yeah. On this podcast, I'm not always right, but I'm definitely willing to just leap out there with some crazy idea and throw it out there.
So, I mean, after doing that, it was time to, I actually stayed in school longer than I should have just to play in that steel drum band for an extra year. I should have graduated a year early, but I didn't.
Right.
So then it was time to graduate, but I had to do an internship to fulfill my recording school requirements. So it's a 6-month internship somewhere. And at some point I was like, I want to go to California. I had met somebody in San Francisco that ran a studio, and I was talking to him, and
that's the way it always is with us. It's like we just happen to meet somebody and they're like, that sounds cool.
Right. And I was like, how about I come intern at your studio? And we talked on the phone a couple times. And finally he said, I think he was concerned because he didn't think I understood how expensive it was.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's in San Francisco, it's not the worry that you won't know enough about the studio. It's the worry that 5 minutes into arrival, you'll be destitute on the street.
So he said, and I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, make me a business plan of how you're going to come out here, intern for me, and how are you going to survive? And so I thought it was the most ridiculous assignment. I'm like 21 years old, 22 years old. I thought that's stupid, but I did it, and I'm glad I did because I realized, I started looking at housing and looking at transportation. How much does gas cost? How much is this? And I think I figured out that I could be there for 2 months, and I was going to have to get a real job, but then I wouldn't have time to do the intern. So it just wasn't going to work. I decided, okay, that's not going to work.
Although I will say to anybody who's listening to this, who is thinking about the internship thing, or anybody, with the studios thinking about bringing on an intern, I do think it's wise for people to think of internships as school tuition, because I think that's a smart way to go. I mean, it can be great if you can go somewhere where you can really like settle in and grow it into a job, at that studio or a different one. But a lot of times, like if you can find a place where you can just show up and you're essentially, you're offering free help at a studio, free labor, let's just call it that,
right.
For like 2 months or 3 months. And you're like, I can feed myself and pay for this apartment and just show up to the studio every day. I think a lot of studios would be like, they might think, well, I don't want to train you and then have you leave. But I mean, that's kind of the built-in challenge of having an intern. But a lot of studios might say, well, that sounds great, especially if you're like, you're going to be here every day. Like anything we're working on, you're in it to win it. That's appealing to studios. And I think as an intern, if you can find a place where there's an opportunity like that, where there's enough going on every day, and that doesn't mean sessions always. It could just be like, today we're doing maintenance. Today we're driving over to the tech shop and trying to,
I mean, it's an invaluable thing for studios to just have somebody there to do these things that we need done, but we don't have time to do that because I just got a call that I have to go find this file that I recorded 7 years ago and get it to this person. And, it's all the day-to-day stuff. It's like, having an intern is invaluable.
I know as a studio guy myself, sometimes what's valuable about having an intern, especially with a home studio like mine, is just like, I got to get up off my ass. There's my intern's showing up at 10 today. He's going to be here and I'm going to have to do something.
Right. You got to look good in front of your intern. You don't want it to be like, oh, this guy's lazy.
You know, it's like, I'll surprise myself with the amount of projects we knock out just because I got to think of something for us to do. You know?
Right. So yeah, I was like, okay, well, where else can I go? And I was like, I'm not going to Nashville. That's for country music. I don't like country music. But I found an internship with, I actually came out here and just went to a couple different places and ended up taking an internship at Sony Tree Studio, which was, I guess it was the publisher's studio for Sony, the publishing company.
Let's break that down just a little bit. So Rockstar's Sony Tree, my guess, I didn't work there. I think I may have been there at some point or another, but you're not going to see a lot of heavy metal and heavy rock bands coming through.
No. And at that time, you know, I was a little like lost musically and like, what do I like? So I was kind of open to anything.
Yeah. So what kind of music would come through?
Oh, it was a lot of country. I mean, just like anything that their songwriters did that they needed to make a demo of, that's what was happening. Right. So I got there and
like full band? Would you have
full
mic
band
up drums and stuff?
Yeah, and you know, of course, I wasn't miking up drums. I was making coffee and Xeroxing charts and taking the trash out. And, you know, just hanging around and you know, when I got there, I realized how much I did not know about recording.
Yeah.
I knew how to plug a mic in. I knew that this was a dynamic mic. This is a condenser mic. That's a ribbon mic. I mean, aside from that, I would look at a console still and be like, I don't know how that works.
By the way, ribbon mic, what do you not do with a ribbon mic?
Well, they say don't put phantom power on it, but I have seen so many ribbons get phantom power by accident and nothing. I don't recommend you test that. But
yeah, maybe don't test it on your own mic. I think with my Coles 4038, it was actually more dangerous for me to just let somebody sing on it where they're blowing into it or move it around too fast.
Or put it in front of a guitar amp, a loud guitar amp. That'll blow it for sure.
Yeah. Look, if you're like me, then you love having cool instruments in your studio, right? No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments and sounds you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then adding awesome overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Use the code ROCK10 now to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples, all over at nativeinstruments.com. Some people would say that the reason why the phantom power ribbon mic thing is like a dumb concern is because, man, all the old studios, they had phantom power on every line going from the console all the time, and you couldn't turn it off.
And I remember working at a studio recently that they had phantom power on all the pre's all the time. And I was looking around, there's all these ribbon mics set up, and I was like, how's that? But I don't know. I don't do it, but out of habit, I don't purposely, like, let's give this ribbon phantom and see what happens.
I've heard somebody once suggest that phantom power sending to a dynamic mic makes it noisier than if you turn the phantom power off. But I have not heard that. Interesting stuff. You hear a lot of stories in the studio.
There's a lot of, I mean, you can go down any kind of rabbit hole you want and talk.
And we do. And then sometimes we start podcasts for it. So you did the Sony Tree thing, and then you ended up over at Blackbird.
Well, yeah. So I think the main concern, it was Pat McMakin that hired me as an intern over there. And his main concern was, I don't think I'm going to have enough for you to do for 6 months. So then,
6-month internship.
Yeah. That's what they wanted.
That's awesome.
For school. But I mean, I showed up every day and I did not, they had to tell me to go home.
That's the way to do it.
Because I figured, well, I'm here. I don't have any friends here. I'm not doing anything else. I may as well just go all in show up every morning before anybody gets there, stay. They would have to be like, Nathan, you got to go home.
Do you have any friends now?
No, I don't have any.
Okay.
I have like 3. But, that's the life we lead. So, I was really hoping that, the easy thing that would happen would be, oh, this guy's great, let's hire him. But towards the end, I've started to realize that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's a common theme for
Right.
people. And so what do you feel like you learned about an appropriate way to think about it?
Well, I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do next, And so I started writing letters. I was like, I don't know how else to do it. I'm just going to start writing letters to studios. I guess I'm going to do another internship because I'll try one more time. And I had heard about Blackbird from the guys at Sony. That's all people were talking about, was this new place called Blackbird. And it sounded like, Emerald City or something. And I was like, I may as well write them a letter too. I mean, they're not going to respond to it, but may as well. And I think I wrote a letter to every single person there. Like, I just looked up on their website and was like, okay, who's there? This guy, this guy, this guy. I'm going to write a letter to all 3 of them.
That's genius, man. That's smart thinking. That's thinking outside the box.
And I think that one of the engineers, Paul Hart, over at Sony, was friends with Jeremy Cottrell, who was at Blackbird, and he had called him, I didn't know this, and told him about me after I'd written the letter. And they called me and said, hey, you want to come by for an interview for an internship? So I went, and cool, I'm going to go intern at Blackbird. And then it was, at that time, they had like 1 intern during the day and 2 interns at night and like a night manager. I don't know how many they have. They have a lot now, but so it was a really good time to be there because there wasn't a lot of people there. There wasn't a lot of people wanting that job. There were still too many, because I want it, and I see like 5 other dudes that want that job too. So I just went there and I did the same thing. I just stayed as long as I could. Anytime they needed extra help, sometimes they'd have turnovers at night where you'd go in at like midnight, and I would do that.
Yeah.
Just giving everything I had to that internship. And so then towards the end of that, I was like, oh man, there's one guy. And it was like always a first come, first serve. So if you were there first, then the next spot that opens up, that's your spot. You get it. So there was one guy in front of me, and there was a spot that opened up. And I was like, man, so I'm not going to get it. So I think I went and applied for a job at Best Buy. And I had an interview like on a Friday afternoon. And that Friday morning, they called me and they said, hey, do you want to work here?
At Best Buy?
No, at Blackbird.
Okay.
and I was just like, of course I want to work there. That's all I want. And, I canceled that interview at Best Buy, and to get hired on at Blackbird is not like, you're not going to go engineer records now. You're going to.
Yeah. So what do you do? So to describe what a day in the life of a new hire at a big studio like that.
So for me, I was what's called the night manager. So from 4 p.m. until whenever the last session is done, you're kind of in charge of the operation of the studio. So get there at 4 because there's an overlap of like 2 hours when all the other managers go home. So here's what's going on today. Here's what I need you to do tonight.
Does Night Manager have its own theme song, like a B television?
I think it's like the theme
right?
to The Exorcist.
Night Manager.
But so it's basically working nights.
Yeah,
and being in charge of the interns and making sure the studio is clean.
So there's interns there at night.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah. There were at that time. I think I had 2 under me at night.
And what does night mean? Does that mean like, till 9 o'clock and then everybody goes home? Or does it mean like, you might be there till 9 in the morning?
Yeah, more likely. I mean, it was all kinds of nights. So early on, there was nights that were like, okay, well, it's 10 o'clock and we're done. I mean, you would wait till the last session's done, and then you have to clean the whole place. So, and then you got to lock it up and all the protocols for doing that. But,
and let's describe the place a little bit. So Rockstars, just so you can picture it, it's not like cleaning up your home studio.
Right.
This is like, last time I counted, are there 11 studios there?
I think it's
like A through G or
I think there's even an I and an 8. There's an H, there's an I, there might be a J.
An A through Z, and it starts over again. Double A.
At the time that I got there was A, B, C, and D, and they were building E and F. So it was getting bigger.
Yeah.
And when E and F opened, it was too big. I had to go to them and be like, I need another intern at night. I just can't get it all done. Because, I mean, we're there till 7 a.m. People are starting to come in.
Wow.
And I'm not done cleaning.
Yeah.
So, that was a big help. But, there was nights, I mean, it was just all night a lot of times.
Well, that's amazing. It's just like having the vision for that kind of studio that's so, that's run like a high-end hotel,
right.
where it's like everything is clean and it's like coming back into a fresh, clean space every single morning.
Exactly. And it was they were definitely like customer service, like top-notch, the best. They want the best for the client. It was really stressed to us, like how clean things had to be. So, I was, I would wear guys out if it wasn't clean enough. I'd be like, you got to do it again.
Nice. I've been watching this show on TV that turns out it's all the way back from like 2010 called Pacific, and it's about like World War II.
Oh, wow.
And there's just great, like, like the company CEO yelling at the recruits, in their face.
Right.
I mean, I can picture you there.
No, I didn't
do it again.
That didn't come till later.
What are you going to do when Mastadon comes into the studio tomorrow?
So, I did that for years. Because, you're just kind of waiting until somebody leaves or something happens and they have an assistant position open up. And,
right. Because you're just you're just in the waiting game.
And, sometimes you're like, man, this isn't going to happen. I'm going to be cleaning this toilet till I'm 50 years old. I remember cleaning a toilet once and talking on the phone to somebody, and they say, "You're still over there cleaning toilets?"
And then the phone, which was wedged between your shoulder
falls in the toilet.
And your cheek, slips and falls into the toilet. Last word is like, "Are you really still cleaning that toilet?"
Yeah. So, then finally somebody, I can't remember, somebody left, or the guy in front of me decided he didn't want to be an assistant. So he left. And then it was, hey, we got a session, we need an assistant. And then it was.
Wow. And at this point, do you feel like you've just seen it happen so much that you feel like, I know what to do? Or are you still like scared
I didn't know
shitless?
what the hell I was doing. I was so nervous. I didn't want to mess anything up. I mean, I knew, over that time I had watched, there was a lot of guys over there that you could go to, and you just watch them. And anytime you get a chance, you go, I'm going to go hang out with that guy and see what. Sometimes they'd allow you to, as an intern or a night manager, hey, I need some extra help on this session.
Yeah.
So you're like the assistant to the assistant. So you get to see what he's doing. And so you're picking up some of that stuff.
Well, and I got a little bit of that when I was interning at Woodland Studios, because some assistants would get the tracking set up the night before.
Right.
So they're in there setting up at night.
Yeah.
And then you get a chance to come in and check it all out and see how things go.
Yeah, and
but that was as close as I got where I was. And what's funny is I also got offered a night position, but I had interned in the tech department.
Okay.
So they wanted me to come in and repair shit all night.
Right.
And I was just like, man, I don't want to do that. And I didn't do it, but who knows? Maybe I would have.
It's a lonely existence.
Maybe I would have gotten that assistant opportunity later.
You never know what's going to happen. I think about that every day. It's like I'll do stuff that I may not really want to do, but I'm like, you know what? It could be fun. Sometimes it's not, but it could lead to something else, It's so, so I started assisting and then just did that for years, just assisting everybody, because at that place.
Let's talk about some of that. So is that when you had a chance to work with Vance, Niko Bolas, George Massenburg, Joe Chiccarelli, and those guys?
So Vance was like the dad at Blackbird. We all learned so much from him. And he was always one that would take on new guys and teach them things.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to have you as my assistant, and he was very good at and patient.
Yeah. He loves rock and roll too.
Yeah. And so I learned so much from working with him, and he's a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah. Vance is a guy who'll give you a hard time, but it's because he loves you and he wants you to get good at it.
Exactly. And a lot of those guys are that way. And some are harder on you than others because, so I worked with Vance and George, and then this guy, Niko Bolas, came to town and he needed a guy. And somehow I became that guy. And man, that was kind of trial by fire for me.
Yeah, Niko's done a lot of cool records too.
Yeah, and he's demanding. I mean, he wants you to, and he's that way. Like if he expects a lot from you, and if you don't perform up to that level, he'll let you know.
Yeah.
And for me, I wasn't really used to that, and so I had to get some thick skin pretty quick.
Yeah. And
so he was essential for me to develop that thick skin. But we did a lot of records together, and Joe Chiccarelli would come in and you'd work with him, and all these guys are like really intimidating because you know what they've done, and it's like, oh, I can't even believe he's letting me in the room. But you just learn so much from all those guys.
Joe can famously be pretty intense about it. I've heard. But I mean, he's done so much cool stuff. I mean, it's like I would love to. I'd rather be intimidated working with somebody who has a good reason to intimidate me, and I'm going to learn incredible stuff from.
Exactly, and just knowing that, and it's something you have to learn that intimidation and that intensity doesn't come from a place of like ill will. It's really just that they care that much about what they're doing, and they want you to care that much about what you're doing.
Yeah,
so. It really is. It's coming from a good place, and it's just something that you just learn how to accept.
It's funny too thinking about that, because that caring that much exists, but it's good to remember that not every project is going to seem like it's equally worth caring that much about. Like sometimes when you back up, you might be like, well, that record, that's amazing. This one, I didn't really like that one, but the professional attitude is you deliver like 100% to each of those artists regardless, And
I feel like that's been a thing for me. It's like I tell people, I can't give you like, okay, so let's discount, like I'm getting a discount on this product, but I don't know how to discount my service because I go 100% every time I walk in the room. I don't know how to.
Wait, are you going 100% right now?
This is 100%. It may not look like it, but I'm going 100%.
That's awesome, man. Actually, speak about that. Talk about the importance of being chill as an engineer on a session. What have you seen about that? Have you seen engineers? I mean, they might lose their shit to you, the assistant, but do they lose their shit to the artist?
I've seen all kinds of things, yeah. And in my early days, I was guilty of freaking out, oh my God, it's all going wrong, but I think, it's as you get older and you interact with more people, it's very important because the artist is looking to you as this guy's got it handled.
Right.
And if you don't have it handled, they'll pick up on that really quickly.
Yeah.
If you start letting on this, there's a problem, they know about it very quickly.
Yeah. I would find myself telling artists, by the way, that like if I look like something's wrong, that's just my normal look in the studio.
Right.
So just disregard it and enjoy yourselves.
Right.
I'm just getting everything ready for us.
Exactly.
Sometimes I try and get away with that.
Because I have these facial expressions that I'm plagued with. That something will happen and my face will change, and somebody's like, oh, what's wrong? I'm like, oh, nothing. Or like the rig crashes. That used to be a lot bigger deal than it is now, because now it's like within 5 seconds you got to back up. But it's like, just don't say anything. Like I usually, hey, give me a second.
Wait, like 5 New York seconds or 5 California seconds?
Which one's quicker?
5 North Carolina mountain seconds?
It's like half a day.
Yeah, I mean, so what about that? What about, did you find yourself learning that, of course, something goes wrong on a session because something always goes wrong on a session?
I mean, it does. It's like, what's the next thing that's going to go wrong? I mean, there's something is going to happen.
Right.
And I think you prepare. I like to over prepare.
Yeah.
So I'm like thinking of everything that could go wrong and deal with it the night before. I've got everything in its place. This is here. This is there. This is going on because I know something is going to come up.
Yeah. And don't forget this, rock stars. Don't forget to actually press record and let Pro Tools roll for as long as you're going to actually need it to roll. You can always delete it. But like make sure that it'll actually record for 5 minutes straight.
Or make sure it just even records. I had something recently where I was filling in on a session for somebody. So they were working and they're like, I got to go out of town. Can you cover this? Sure. What are we doing? Oh, vocal. Awesome. Get in the day, get the drive booted up. Guy's in there, opens his mouth. I roll the track. I go to punch in. Nothing. I look up. It's in quick punch. What's happening? I realized that whatever drive they had mounted was like a Fat 32 or something. It wouldn't record to it. And I'm like,
oh, yeah.
Well, that's something I should have checked last night.
Atom Audio's S-Series, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors featuring 5 models from the compact S2V all the way up to the powerful S5H. The range builds on Atom Audio's iconic heritage with new technology for improved acoustic performance. With new woofers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine, the S-Series ensures accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail, and a forward-looking digital connectivity. Backed by a 5-year guarantee, Atom Audio monitors embody durability and professional sound for your studio at atomaudio.com. Right, because they brought in the drive and you can hook it up to the computer.
Right. And the session will open from it, but it just wouldn't allocate to record.
I didn't know a session would open from the Fat 32 because so Rock says we're talking about, you're probably on a Mac if you're working in Pro Tools in a pro studio, most pro studios. Apologies to those of you who have PCs, but most pro studios in Nashville, for example, or the, New York or LA are going to be Macs for sure.
But that's a terrible feeling for the guys out there ready to sing. And all of a sudden you're like, man, I got to copy this to a different drive real quick. And now he's got to go to the lounge or something. And all that energy that he just had, that he was ready to get out is kind of ruined.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So as the engineer, as the producer, we're trying to make sure that we are never a visible filter through which the artist has to experience the session, right?
Right. You want to be as invisible as possible.
And yet at the same time, the really pro session musicians, artists, and everything like that, they shrug it off and they come back to do it again as if it was a fresh take.
Yeah. I mean,
and it's the same thing. They're doing the same thing that we have to do.
Exactly. And most of them are pretty understanding about it. It happens.
Yeah.
Pro Tools crashes.
Yeah. They've worked in a pro studio. They're used to that. Tell us about Nick Raskulinecz. And am I pronouncing his name?
Yes.
Right? Okay, great. And then, so what kind of records was he doing, and what did you do with him?
So he was in LA, and he moved to Nashville, and I think he was doing records out at the Sound Kitchen. And then at some point, he booked a session at Blackbird, and I got asked to assist on it. And he was working with another engineer over there. I think this was the first time I ever worked with him was just a short little stint. It was like 2 days. And, I'd never seen anything like it because it was so different from the way I'd seen all the sessions in Nashville where everybody's out on the floor, they play together, it was the Nashville thing. And then he's doing harder records with, now let's really focus on the drums and let's get the drum performance, and then we'll put the guitars on it, and then we'll put the bass on it. And I thought that was really interesting. And so you
hadn't really seen that yet in the studio?
Not really. I didn't know that was a way you could do it.
Yeah.
I always thought, you have to get the whole band in there and you have to do it. It's everybody together. But then he came back for another record, which was a record by a band, Stone Sour, and booked like a couple months. And I worked on that with him, and my friend Paul Fig, who's an engineer in LA, engineered that. And I really saw how, you know, these guys really dig in and make this their home for that many months. And, you know, you're really honing in on every single aspect of the record, and it's just a different environment. And I really liked how he did it. I had a lot of fun working with those guys. And
you were still at Blackbird.
Yeah, I was still a Blackbird staff assistant, and then so I really had a lot of fun, and we liked working together. And so anytime he would come back with a big record, he would have me assist on it.
Right. So
we did, you know, the Stone Sour record, an Evanescence record, a Ghost record. And after a little time had passed, he had another engineer in town named Ben Terry who ended up leaving to do something else. And that's kind of the story of my life, is like somebody leaves, and so you get a call.
Yeah.
You're always waiting for somebody else to leave.
Let's comment on that, because I talk to interns and young people that are starting out now, and one of the recommendations that I try to make is try and set up your world so that when that call comes, the answer is just always yes.
Yeah.
Because like you have to be flexible. You have to, like for me, I joined a lacrosse team at first, and then like that immediately died off the vine, because it was like, I can't commit to anything else, no other schedules in life other than your day to day.
Yeah. And especially in the early years, I mean, it's like you want to say yes to everything, because you never know when that next big chance is going to happen. I mean, you could go in thinking this is going to be a waste of my time, I'm going to hate it, but then you might meet somebody there that hires you to do something else that leads to this, that leads to that, and next thing you know, you have a career.
Now, as an assistant, as a house assistant in the studio, you were sort of lucky that you got the call in that first session, and then it went well. And so then when you know, Nick, for example, is coming back and booking another longer session, hopefully he's booking it in advance and saying, and I want Nathan to be on the session. So, you know, you can plan for it. But what a bummer. Like, did you ever experience those things where you're already booked on a different session?
Oh, yeah.
And then something comes along and you're like, oh.
And then sometimes you sort of orchestrate it to where you can do both. You know, I'm always like, I want to do everything. So sometimes you can't do everything, but sometimes you figure out a way to like, okay, I can do this here. And then if I don't sleep, I can get up and do this the next day.
Yeah.
You know, when you're younger, it's easier to do that.
Right.
But
right.
So, you know, then, so his engineer left. Paul was out in LA working. And I guess it wasn't making sense for him to keep flying him here. And he took over a room at Dark Horse, as this is going to be my spot. I'm going to move my console in here. And he called me and said, do you want to engineer a record for me? Dark
Horse is a cool spot.
Yeah.
Maybe give us a little description of that
studio. So it's like way out in Franklin, like almost to Leaper's Fork. So at the corner of like, what is it? Old Hillsboro and Charlotte or something.
Yeah. And who's the artist again that started it?
Oh, it's Robin Crow.
Robin Crow, right,
yeah.
right. And I saw him perform at my college.
Oh, wow.
In St. Louis back in the
I think he was he was an artist and he was a motivational speaker as well.
Exactly, yeah. And he showed up and he was doing the funky slapping acoustic guitar with delays and cool things way before Instagram, you know.
He's a super interesting guy. And I think he like built that place himself even. And
it's a beautiful, beautiful, big, giant wooden.
It is. And we were in this
palace.
He had like the main building, which I think he calls the Lodge. And then there's a little tiny building called the Cabin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Nick took over. So he calls me and I go down there, and I think it was a record for a band called The Hold Steady. And that was the summer of 2013. And so I said, yeah, I'll come down there and do that. So I did it. We did it. And then towards the end of that, so I got this band coming in next week. And do you want to do that one too? Okay, cool. And I'm still a staff guy at Blackbird at this point. I never quit. But these records, he just started having record after record after record. And finally, I just had to go to him and say, I don't think I'm coming back. I'm going to go do this for a while.
Yeah.
And that was 10 years ago. And I still make records with Nick.
That's cool. That's cool. What do you want to talk about in terms of that process, like that building it one at a time? I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about. What's a good starter? It's
a different way. It's just another way of doing it.
Were you there at the pre-production stage?
Sometimes we would do pre-production together, which, was always interesting because it's, the band comes in, they set up, and it's Nick and the band going through the songs. Let's try this. Let's try that.
So at this point, it's band playing together. Pre-production is band plays together.
Yeah.
But if you hit record on that and then mix that, it would sound different than the final record.
Oh,
does, right?
Of course. And I'm always there to record it because, they're going to need to hear back some sort of reference because they're going to forget. Well, what did we do in the bridge there? Oh, right. I've got it. What tempo were we playing that? I've got it here. So you're kind of like a field recorder, making notes, dropping markers. This is when this happened. Here's the take that they've finished with before moving on to the next song. So I'm going to make a rough mix of that so everybody can have it.
Yeah.
So the drummer can remember his drum parts that they work, because they'll work out rough, basically all the sections of the song.
I remember the first time I kind of learned a tough lesson about that. I was producing an album and I hired a band for the artist, and I had everybody come in on a Friday. This was based on their availability. They came in on a Friday. We went through all the songs and did all this quick, I think we recorded it. I just remember that we worked it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody came back on a Monday for the session and they had all forgotten all of it. And I was like, oh. So good lesson to learn there. There's a reason why taking notes, recording it one way or another is really important.
And I'll even, because that's been beaten into me by, like Niko, his whole thing is hit record before you set up the mics. So I'm in record before they even walk in the door.
Wow. So tell us some, break that down for us a little bit. How does that sounds good in story, but sometimes you're like, how would I even do that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll set up all the mics the night before and make sure they're working. And then, as soon as the band walks in, I want to hit record. I haven't gotten any of the sounds up or anything, but if the guitar player may pick up a guitar right away and start playing something, and if you didn't get that, I mean, not often do you get something where they're like, oh, that's amazing. What that thing I did at the beginning of the day. But when you do have it, I mean,
I remember back in the day of consoles and stuff, it used to be maybe easier. It's like everything's coming up through the board anyway. Right. So you just kind of rolled a DAT. You just kept DATs rolling.
Oh, yeah.
And a DAT tape could record for hours,
right.
on the sidelines. In the world of Pro Tools, I've often felt like, there should be a way to do that. It's unfair. There's a lot of things that are unfair to us,
right.
Since we've switched to computers. Because if you wanted to do that, you'd probably have to have a multi-track session open.
Right.
And it's rolling nonstop.
And the only way I found to sort of alleviate that is I do it at 44.1. I normally will record everything at 96, but when we're doing pre-production, I go way lower sample rate.
Right. So pre-production particularly is where you want that always be rolling.
Yes. Yeah. Because if you're talking about doing instruments separately, I mean, you could roll out but everything's fixed on the timeline. There's not a lot of spontaneity in that aspect because the drummer's going to go out there. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to start the take.
Yeah, you're already, now you're you're inking it in.
Exactly.
If this were a comic book, we're past the pencil sketches
right.
and we're inking it in,
right.
and putting the colors in. Another tool that I find super useful in that pre-production stage, even if it's the same day you're going to record, a lot of indie records we do pre-production and the record making is
right.
They're right on top of each other. Hopefully they're in the right order. Hopefully we're doing pre-production a moment before we record the record as opposed to the other way around.
Right.
But just voice memo on an iPhone.
Exactly.
Like I've learned, but just grab your iPhone. The moment somebody starts to play something for you in the control room, B-roll in the iPhone, if they're going to like, all right, well, let's play through it once and see what we think, roll the iPhone, because you're going to need to refer back to that.
Yeah.
And then another place I find it really helpful is the moment you hear a part in your head, like you're like hearing a harmony or like, oh, I hear this line. We should do guitar should do this melody line. I'll just sing it into the iPhone while the speakers are going in the
right. And I've had situations where, on that same line, like if I'm working with Nick, and he's not there for the day or something, he'll send me a voice memo of an idea. Get the band to do this. And it's the same, like he'll just sing it into his phone and then send it.
And you play the voice memo, it's like, Elvira. Yeah, cool. Any other good tips for capturing that moment like that? Are there other tools you use?
Not really. I mean, sometimes the guy's in the control room and I'll figure out, okay, well, I got the talkback mic. I'll route the talkback mic to Pro Tools real quick. And so at least I have that, I don't want anything to go uncaptured.
Yeah, it's interesting. You could always just have a mic. I mean, you run the risk of blowing your speakers.
Yes,
but you could have a mic in the control room that is just going to a track in your Pro Tools session that's always recording just in case.
Yeah.
And there's times I've thought of elaborate schemes where I'm like, I need to outfit, PZM mics in every room of the studio and have them all route to a mixer that's got a limiter on it, like a talkback limiter. That, it's like an all talkback for anywhere in the studio, or each one of them is on a cycling recorder. And like, you play these games in your head.
Right.
And
exactly.
Then, you either never do them, or if you try and do, you're like, that's the stupidest idea. That's going to be so hard to do.
I mean, I can remember there was one band we worked with down at Dark Horse when they did a very long pre-production process. And part of their process would be to go take their acoustic guitars down to the lunch table down at this little gazebo and work out parts. And I was like, well, how do
I record the gazebo?
Yeah. So I think I like took a super long cable and a 57 and just put it down there and just, cranked it. So at least I'd have it. I don't know that I ever even had to use it, but just knowing that it's a scary feeling when somebody comes and asks you to play them back something that you don't have.
Yeah. How often have you recorded something outside in a studio situation?
Not often.
Not often.
I'm trying to think as an assistant, I remember going around with an artist to record trains.
Yeah, I did that too. We brought over a little stereo recorder and we waited for the train to pass and then recorded at the gate.
Well, I think it was like the one day that no trains were running.
Right. And then the rain.
Right.
You're inevitably going to have somebody who like, I recorded this storm. Can we use that in the record? And you're like, sure. Isotope RX to the rescue.
Exactly. And then you just end up Googling rainstorm on YouTube and recording it off your phone.
Exactly. I do that so many times. I had a band that wanted a Screaming Eagle and I'm just like, Googling Screaming Eagle and like pull that. He's probably something that the same sample they use, at the local high school football game when they play it over the megaphone,
I remember doing that once and the band was like, you can do that? I'm like, sure. And I guess. As long as SoundScan can't, or whoever, it's like a Shazam can't like recognize this particular Screaming Eagle. Hey, that's my rain noise.
There you go, man.
That's minute 47 of my rain noise from YouTube.
I am massively impressed with Isotope Ozone. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The mastering assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need for a professional result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, you simply adjust the settings to your own taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval and get comments back like, holy bleep, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, you're a wizard, finally I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge, well then I know I'm doing something right. So check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great apps at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music we are creating to the style that we want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments' complete bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and then adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's a great way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Nathan Yarborough, joining us here at Recording Studio Rockstars headquarters, the new podcast booth, and the Toy Box Studio. Nathan, you ready to jam?
I am.
Sweet. All right, so let's talk about some of the records that you've done, because there's a lot of cool stuff, and there's a lot of, we want to geek out now on all the technique stuff, and love to hear.
And obviously I've played different roles on different, some I've just recorded, some I've recorded and mixed. So.
I suspect you've got an opinion about just about everything, though.
Oh, yeah.
So that'd be good to hear. So, like, just commenting on some records, Weapon of Choice, Glasswalker, what that track starts out with this great heartbeat, and the guitars and the drums are just like, bam, in your face. And generally speaking, listening to your discography, these are loud records, too. And so let's start with that. Making stuff that just hits hard like that. Should we be thinking about this build it? I call it building the house one brick at a time. It's like building up our tracks. What's that balance? And then also the loudness thing. Have you learned anything about how that relates to things like luffs and mixing and what you're going for and that sort of thing?
I have to admit that I don't usually pay attention to stuff like luffs. I know what the readings that they say you should aim for. I don't know where they're getting that, because I hear records that are obviously way louder than that are on Spotify or whatever platform you're listening to. So I'm like, well, that's way louder than what do they say, 14? Was
it almost as loud as me repeatedly smashing my water bottle in the background? That's me just trying to take a sip of water.
I'm sort of learning to actually mix quieter these days. Not in terms of how I'm monitoring, but in terms of how I'm printing. I find it used to be like, oh, I got to make everything so loud. It's got to be loud because it's got to be loud. But I'm finding that may not be. I'm having more success pulling it back a little bit.
Well, I assume some of the records that are in your discography might be something that you assisted on, but somebody else was sort of responsible for the mix as well.
A lot of them I tracked, and was there through the whole process. And then you would send it to somebody else to mix.
Okay. Have you learned some stuff about getting powerful and loud sounds in the tracking? And then, we might as well talk about, drums too. Obviously, for these heavy records, drums seem to take on a very distinct personality.
Yeah.
That can be very different from just setting up a band, jamming in the studio, playing, some indie rock records or just songwritery things or soulful groove-based things.
Right. Yeah, I think, for me, recording drums and I learned a lot about recording drums for this style of music from working with Nick and about, where to put things to get ideal isolation and why you don't want to over EQ this because you're going to pull in this and it's going to be a problem later. And so I really studied all those things. And, I use a lot of mics.
Yeah, let's break it down, man. Give us a breakdown of, obviously every session's and record's a little different.
Right.
But give us some good starter things that we should, that we could try. Give us some starter ideas for like, hey, here's some things that you should think about. And especially like that idea of like knowing in advance, if you do this now, it's going to cause you a problem
right
when you get to the mix.
And, I think it just starts with what drums you're using.
Yeah.
First of all. And I think a lot of people will forget that. It's, I always view the most important thing is the thing at the furthest end of the chain, which is the instrument or even the person playing the instrument. So if you have somebody that's not good at their instrument, then you're not going to get a good recording. I don't care how great the microphone and the mic pre is. You're just getting a really great recording of someone who can't play.
Yeah, and it's one of the advantages of having my own studio and leaving the drum set up.
Right.
So for example, I'll do a jam session and my buddy will come over and play drums and he's a drummer. And then we'll switch because he wants to play some guitar and I want to play some drums. And we both aspire to play. He probably plays better guitar than I play drums. But I'll think I'm playing pretty good and I'll go listen to the later and it'll be the same exact drum set, same miking, same mix because I just bounce it right out. And his drums will sound one way and mine will sound a different way. And it's really remarkable.
It
it's
is
the same shit.
But and so you can see like the biggest influence on them is the hand that's hitting them, the foot that's hitting them. So always keep that in mind. And what drums are you using? What size is the bass drum? Is it a 20? Is it a 22? Is it a 24? Because you're going to get different sounds out of each of those. What's your room like? Where in the room do you have them? What heads are on the drums?
When you're doing that heavy sound and you've got that fast, like that kind of kick drum.
Right.
Talk a little bit about what helps you get the right kick for that. I mean, it's interesting because listening to your discography, like on some of those, and I apologize, I didn't necessarily write down which band had that sound, but Code Orange probably has some of that stuff going on too. Like at a lower speaker volume, I might think, wow, that kick drum's, it's all about like the beater
right
and the top. But then if I crank up the mix too, I'm like, no, there's low end in there too. Mm-hmm. It's like, it must almost have a scooped attitude.
And I couldn't tell you exactly what they did. I could tell you what I heard when I worked on the record.
Yeah.
Because record was sort of an interesting thing for me because the first record we worked on was a record called Underneath, which we did with Nick. And then the most recent one, which it's not out yet, but it'll be out by the time this airs. It's called The Above. And they called me to come up and just help them, go through like some guitar sounds and help them wrangle some of the editing and basically navigate the studio that they were in because they're self-engineering and self-producing this one. But they needed a little bit of help navigating the studio. So I went up there to help them.
And that's Code Orange? Because they sound awesome.
They're
like you hear that and you don't think this is somebody who's DIYing anything.
They are absolutely brilliant at what they do. And they are one of the hardest working bands that I know.
I bet.
And they are so good at creating what they hear in their head. But it goes through a lot of different layers of process. So, I was involved in a piece of that process. And there's a lot of supplementation, and I'm not sure who mixed that one, honestly. But
do you think that it might be, or let me put it this way. How common do you think it is for a heavy band to record the kick drum knowing that it's going to need a sample later on?
Oh, yeah.
And do you think that there's a technique wherein that sample is actually replacing the original kick drum, or do they live together? That kind of stuff.
For me, when I work, I'm not afraid to use samples. I think it's the dreaded S word. Sometimes they'll call it by a different word,
right? Just
so people don't get offended.
Call it enhancement,
right? And I think that's really what it's like using an equalizer or a parallel compression. To me, it's like, well, here's a sound we can sort of inject into that, just because by the end of the day, on those heavy records, you have, okay, so you record the drums and they sound great. Well, then you're going to put a huge layer of guitars on that and a huge bass on that. And all these things have to speak through that.
Well, I almost would put it this way. We've all heard instruments like guitars and basses and stuff sound pretty good coming out of the speakers in the studio. And we've all experienced probably a sound soloed sounding massive.
Mm-hmm.
And on some of these heavy records, I realized that the sound of the guitars plus the bass, it's almost like a soloed massive sound on its own that allows, like, by itself, it's dialed in to just explode out of your car speaker, for example,
right,
which doesn't leave a lot of room for anything else to be put in there. So then therefore the drums in that moment need to be sculpted in such a way that they just augment that, but don't in any way try and like fight for the same zone.
Exactly. And sometimes you need samples to just give it that extra. And if you mute the actual kick and snare, you almost don't hear anything, but they're there to just kind of help it out.
Yeah. Are there any recording tricks? I mean, I remember hearing stories about Black Sabbath back in the day, taping a quarter to the inside of the drum head beater and stuff like that.
I mean, I don't have any like special tricks like that. I'll use a couple different, I use a lot of microphones. So like there's, an inside mic and an outside mic, but then sometimes I might put like a PZM mic in there to get an extra thwack.
So how do you do a PZM mic in the kick drum? Give us that trick.
Just lay it in there on the pillow.
So it's not really on the bottom edge. It's sort of like elevated a little bit into the middle, toward the middle of the drum.
Kind of, yeah. And a lot of times I have to tape it on the pillow because as the drummer hits it, the drum moves and the mic shifts over to this, you walk out there and now your mic's upside down and it's like, oh, that's why it doesn't sound good. But it's like if I'm using like a Beta 91, I'll put that little EQ switch on that dips the middle out because it's kind of got like an ugly middle sound.
What's the Beta 91?
It's that shirt. It's like, it's not a true PZM.
Okay, all right.
But it's like their version of the PZM, I guess. It's not a true PZM, but
yeah, I need to experiment with that PZM kick drum thing.
I like it. I mean, it adds an extra thing that, sometimes I feel like you need just to get that bass drum to push forward.
Yeah. Do you find that it's helpful to ever time align any of those mics, or do you leave them as is?
That's a rabbit hole I went down at one point, and I think I was working with Michael Beinhorn, and he turned me on to like the Sound Radix auto align, and I started using it. I was like, man, that's cool. But then I started noticing some weirdness with it to where I ended up just not using it because it just didn't sound right to me after a while. It works, but it was like almost, it just didn't sound natural.
Right. I just preferred more of a natural.
Exactly. And
I've gone back and forth on things like that sometimes, you know.
I like to use that plugin on bass because I feel like, you know, if you got a DI and an amp and then a couple amp signals, they're never going to be time aligned. And I feel like it sounds, to me, I get a lot more tight low end out of the bass by using and I don't have like a particular way of doing it. Sometimes I'll line it to the amp. Sometimes I'll line it to the DI. It's just whatever sounds the best. And sometimes I'll end up turning it off.
So Rockstars, we're talking about the Sound Radix plugin Auto Align, which is pretty handy because you kind of tell it what your elements are and it'll find a sweet spot for time aligning.
Right.
You know, because we've talked about this on the show, of course, before. Some of you will already know this. This might be new too. But the DI, the direct bass signal, is going to happen sooner than the time it takes to go through the guitar amp, out the speaker and into the microphone and back through the signal chain.
Right.
And so they are actually a little out of phase from each other.
Yeah.
And there are times where that can be great. You know, some people put a bass mic 6 feet away from the bass amp to get that sound. But when they're so close, like a DI and the close mic on an amp, it can be worth exploring. And Little Labs, the
the IBP.
Yeah, IBP and the IBP plugin, which I need to get.
It's a great plugin, and when it works, it works.
Yeah,
and I think it's important to know that these things aren't always the answer, because sometimes I don't just do it out of habit. It's like, I want to see if this helps it. If it doesn't, I'm not going to do it.
And I think that is an important aspect to remember about sessions. So there are elements of making a record that are just an exploration and an experiment, and there's no way of knowing whether it's going to be the right choice or the wrong choice unless you go through it and do it. But there are definitely various elements of making a record that fall into that category, I feel like. And sometimes we have to decide, you know, is this record in this budget, in this band, leaving room for that category of making the record, or is that outside the scope of what we're allowed to do right now?
And I think sometimes I'll spend lots of time by myself after everybody's gone home doing those experiments, because you don't have time to do that while everybody's there, and the artist doesn't want to see that. Usually they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing to my record?
I can't unsee that now.
So I find myself like, everybody's gone home. I have an idea. What if we did this? And you know, sometimes it's like, hey, that works pretty well. And sometimes like, no, that didn't work. Let's not do that.
Yeah, I think that things like phase aligning stuff and exploring definitely falls in that category. So does time aligning stuff. You know, like trying to tighten up the drums and the band performance. That can be, it's real, you just don't know. And sometimes you don't even know right after you did it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to lose perspective on those things when you're right there in it. And I do a lot of editing, and it's a balance between how far can we go? How far do we need to go? And sometimes it's like, I don't even need to touch this because it feels great. And I think it's about, you really got to just listen first and say, okay, what does it need?
Yeah. I like making records where I listen and I'm assuming I'm not going to do anything to it until something bothers me, and then I go specifically for that thing.
Exactly. And for a long time, I had the mentality of, I got to fix everything. And you just start doing things before you're not even thinking about why you're doing them. You're just doing them. And then if you take a step back and go, well, why am I doing this? Did it need that? I don't know that it did.
Well, editing drums, for example, we have all these tools like Beat Detective, and we can just hand align things. And, you know, I don't use Elastic Audio very much for that stuff. That's more like a really great demo tool, but I don't always find that's useful for a master quality.
I have big concerns about elastic audio. I've never been able to do it where it sounded good. It's like it almost disrupts the relationships. Like if you have like 10 mics or 20 mics or 30 mics.
Right. It's not going to keep that phase together.
It just sounds weird to me when you start moving stuff and it's like, what happened?
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about monophonic things like a single vocal mic or a single bass, recording or microphone, those are places where I feel like tools like Melodyne can be useful. Even then, you gotta still decide, does it sound better or worse? But at least you can anticipate that there's a good chance it'll sound like what you expect it to sound like.
Right. Right.
And then when you get into that whole elastic audio thing, boy, there were so many weird things. Like then you're like, the cymbals sounded better before I committed the track, when I left the plugin on, or they sound better if I use this particular version of the committing. And it's just such a slippery slope. But I do know that, like, editing drums, I learned, and I'd be curious your thoughts, like lessons like track with the whole band so that the drums have the right approach to the song because the band was playing at the same time, then mute everything else, then like go in and edit the crap out of the drums and put it all like it's either right on the grid or it's, beat detective to where it's really close, and then recut everything.
Right. And sometimes you have to do that because once you've edited the drums, if everybody played it together, then now nothing else is in time because you edited the drums, and then you're faced with that. Well, now I got to edit everything else.
Right. Or you tried to group everything and edit it all together and it still didn't work. And it's just like, it'll really do your head in.
And I've been there before where the band tracked it all together and they want to keep that, but they want this section of the drums edited tight to the grid. So it's, you put it all in a group and you just edit those drums. But then hopefully they gave you a guitar DI, because in heavy music, I mean, you're looking at a block.
Yeah.
I mean, you can listen to it all day long, but the time that cursor moves across and they're not in alignment when you're seeing it and hearing it anyway. So,
and so the DI is one of those tricks where when you record the guitars, you run the guitar through a DI similar to how you would do with the bass.
Yeah.
On its way to the guitar amp, and then that goes to its own track.
Yeah.
And you're never ever going to listen to it for anything.
Correct.
Well, I'll take that back in just a second because that's an upcoming question. But you can use it. It makes an easy visual reference for when somebody struck a chord.
Exactly.
Because you can just see it right there, right?
It's a little cheat.
It's your guide track for editing the mic'd guitars.
Exactly.
Now, the other part of that question is you can take the DI and you can run it through amp simulators. And I know in heavy music, there's a whole world that exists of simulators for cabinets and recording guitars direct. So is it, I still got more drum questions, but we'll come back to those. So tell us a little bit about recording guitars and some of the things that happen in that heavy world that might not happen on just a, recording a band world.
I mean, I could tell you what I have done and what I have seen others do, but there is a whole other side of things that other people do. I don't typically like to use amp simulators and things like that. To me, there's nothing replaces cabinets. I mean, even like on the record, the song by the band Glasswalker, they have their Helix rigs, the Line 6 Helixes that are dialed in and sound great. But I insisted that we use cabinets after them because, they're going to sound good if we just took that direct signal, but it's not going to move the air like a cabinet's going to move. Like you can feel that. And somebody that has grown up going to shows and seeing bands, and I mean, there's that power of an amp, especially for like the main sound. And I think to me, nothing replaces that. I'm sure other people might disagree and say, no, this is better.
The S-Series by Atom Audio, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors, blending advanced engineering and in-house design. With 5 models in various sizes and configurations, these monitors build on Atom Audio's iconic heritage while incorporating new technology for improved acoustic performance. The range includes the compact S2V with the 7-inch woofer, the 3-way S3H with twin 7-inch woofers, the vertical S3V with a single 9-inch woofer, and the powerful S5H and S5V main monitors featuring a 12-inch woofer and exceeding 131 dBSPL per pair. Despite differences in size and power, all these models provide highly analytical sound for professional audio applications. The S-Series includes new woofers, mid-range drivers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine for crossover optimization. The result is accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail in bass and mid frequencies with wider frequency ranges, and forward-looking digital connectivity, all in a durable design. The S-Series ensures longevity in your studio, backed with a 5-year guarantee at atomaudio.com. A version of that I've experienced in the studio is the band comes in and they plop down their pedal board, and they're going through all the usual pedal board on the way to the guitar amp, and they've got a sound that has worked for them live.
Right.
But then I'm like, this just sounds really processed to me. And, and it's not like the mic's not coming to life and stuff like that. And I would take a guitar and go to the guitar player and say, hey, which pedal are you using? And it's like, oh, well, I'm just using this distortion or whatever. It's like, what happens if we just bypass all the other stuff and go through that on the way to the amp? And then the next, and that might sound a lot better. And then the next level is like, hey, what happens if we don't use your pedal at all and we turn the amp way up? Because a lot of people might come with all the sound coming out of the pedals and the amp sits from like medium volume or something.
Right. Yeah, and I do that too. It's like, if we see like 10,000 pedals in a pedal board, you're obviously going to go, really? So let's pick, which ones are you using on this song? Oh, I'm using this one and this one. Okay, let's pull those off, put them. And I always kind of like to let them start with what they're used to, because I think when you immediately tell somebody, oh no, you're going to use this, that puts them in a position where they're kind of uncomfortable already because it's not their normal sound. And this isn't the normal amp that I use. And why does it sound like that? But if you can show them why their thing isn't working, like, okay, let's hear your sound. And then it's like, yeah, that's pretty good, but maybe we do this instead, and then let them hear the difference. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it can sound so much better coming out of the speakers. The guitars can sound crunchier and thicker and fuller. And then, but what's so funny, it's just like all these rules in the studio. As soon as you adopt that, along comes the session where they just did it through the pedal board. You didn't do any of that, and it turned out great, Yeah,
I have a funny story of when I was working with Michael. We were doing a record, and we were doing it all ourselves, and we did it all remote. And it was the Dream the Electric Sleep record. And I had a 50-foot instrument cable. And his voice would just come up on the speakers. We used like Source Connect for the whole thing. I never actually even met him.
Right, because he was in a different studio, remote recording. Yeah.
And I was recording it there, but he was like chiming in, like he'd be on headphones in Denmark or wherever he was at the time. And I said, cool, Michael, we're here. I got the guitar. And he's very into like knowing everything that's in the chain. He wants to know what kind of strings you're using, what kind of cable you're using, what kind of speakers are in the amp. So I'm like, I got the guy here. We're in our control room. and I got a 50-foot instrument run to the other room to the AC30. And he goes, whoa, no, 50 feet. You can't possibly use a 50-foot instrument cable. No way. We're not doing it. So, okay, cool. So then I moved the guitar player into the room with his amp, and I got to set up a talkback and move all the heads because there's, multiple amps involved, some with heads, some combos. So move all that stuff. Okay, let me call you back. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. I'll move it all, call him back. Okay, so now we got the shorter cable, blah, blah, blah. So we go through all that, and he's like, I don't know, let's go back to the other one. So then we move everything back. And, let's go back to the other one. So we move it back. And at the end of it, I accidentally played him the very first reference recording that I made, or the very first, and he goes, what was that? And I was like, well, that was the first thing we had with the 50-foot. Well, that sounds better. So it's like what you were saying is like sometimes you
just don't know.
There's these rules of like, yes, a 50-foot cable has capacitance loss, but sometimes it sounds better.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but it just does.
Yeah, and then there's these interesting ways to get long cable runs out to a guitar amp. Like I remember learning early from my buddy, Brian Carter. He was like, oh, you just run the guitar into a DI.
Right.
Run it on a mic cable and then do another DI on the other end, flipping it around, back around again and into the amp. And then you learn about stuff like the Little Labs PCP box,
right,
which will do it. And Radial makes boxes that you can do that with and stuff. And it's all about switching the impedance. And they do sound different. And was your story with Michael Beinhorn?
Yes.
Yeah, and we talked about that on his interview too. He famously made like these elaborate boxes that they sought out the perfect one-to-one transformers so you could plug in,
right,
and it wouldn't change the sound as it like went through a switcher out to one of the amps and all this kind of stuff. And you really hear all these things, and you get into a little bit of a mystery world too, where it almost becomes too complex to model it perfectly or calculate it. You just got to try them all and use your ear.
Yeah, and it's like, how far down that rabbit hole do you want to go?
Yeah.
I remember he asked me to test the instrument cables for directionality, and I had no idea what he meant. I was like, I'm pretty sure they go both directions. And he was like, no, flip it around and see what sounds better. And I was like, there's no way that's going to sound different. And I did it. And I was like, it sounds different.
Wow. And then how would you judge that it sounded different? You just play something and record a snippet? Because it seems like to flip it around takes too long
right,
for the ear to just remember.
Yeah. And I think I just did it as quickly as I possibly could. And I did register a difference, and then it's like, you just have to make a decision on, and I think that may be subjective.
Now, did you test it as a guitar player? Did you play the guitar and test it? Or did you record the guitar player and test it as an engineer?
Record and test as an engineer.
Because that definitely works, obviously, but sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes, have you noticed that it's easier to have the guitar in your own hands and see what you think?
Yeah. I mean, and that changes it too. So there's all these, it's like I said, how far down the rabbit hole do we go? Because at some point we got to record.
Right. At some point we got to make the record. Well, I feel like all those are good things to do in setup. So for example, I did a session recently where we were just going to do acoustic and vocals. He was just going to do acoustic versions of the tunes. And, he's this is Chris Chamness, and he's a power hitter on the acoustic, and as how he sings too. So I'm thinking like, we're kind of going for a pinball wizard sort of, powerful acoustic kind of thing. And I spent time with my assistant, Jack Foster came over to help. I like to give shout outs. So shout outs to you guys. And he and I set up a stereo miking thing. We tried out like a variety of amps, and I just banged on the guitar.
Right.
I mean, a variety of mic preamps. And I banged out on the guitar, and then we recorded and went listen to them and picked one. And And it really made a difference. And there's no way I could have done that with the artist. I would have destroyed the session if I, made him go through those hoops.
And what I'll do a lot of times is if I have a session the next day, I'll go down there and I'll set up all the drum mics and I'll go hit the drums and come in and listen and go, well, I probably need to move that mic, and I'll go move it. I'll play a little. It takes forever, but it's like if I don't have an assistant with me, that's what I got, and I'll spend hours doing that. But by the time the drummer comes in, all that work has been done.
And it always pays off, doesn't it?
It does.
Always like it's worth doing because the session goes better.
It does. And a lot of times, it's like 9 o'clock. I don't want to do that. But I always talk myself into it. It's like, okay, just do it for a minute. And then a minute, you lose because you start having fun doing it by yourself. And then you lose that track of time. And then it's done. And when you come in and you start pulling the faders up, when the actual person's playing, you're like, oh, yeah, it already is in the ballpark of what I want.
It's fun when you do a record like that and it just sounds great. And the artist's like, yeah, it sounds great. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rolling.
There's none of that. Hang on. And it also eliminates because inevitably when you patch up a whole session and something's not going to work, like this mic pre is for whatever reason crapping out today, or this EQ is cutting the signal. And you don't want to have that happening while the guys out there play, like hit the kick drum, doof, doof, hang on. Oh, give me a second. Hit the kick drum again. Doof, doof, hang on. And you're in there like, I can't get the second bass drum mic to work. And, if you got all that done, then it just makes the next day better. And then the guy thinks you're amazing because he's like, oh, wow, that guy just went in there for like 5 minutes and my drums sound awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It is good. Because actually that reminds me of like this idea of who you're trying to impress or who you're catering to.
Right.
It's a good reminder. We obviously we want to impress the artist or the client, but a lot of times there's great value in impressing the musicians that are on the session, because guess who's going to recommend the studio and the engineer to a future session?
Exactly.
I've had drummers, Dave Gerke, a great drummer here in town. I got to give him thanks for recommending me to Will Kimbrough back in the day, who now plays guitar for Emmylou Harris, because Dave liked how I made his drums sound on a session. So I got the suggestion for the next session. And then I, found myself in a place where I was like, you know what, I'm going to be bold and I'm going to ask Will if I can produce this record with him.
Right.
And he said yes. So then I got a chance to do a record I was really proud of,
That's awesome.
And so it's good to think of who you're going to impress on all this stuff,
And then on the other side of that, there's days where
you're not going to impress anybody.
and I think, it's learning to be okay. You're not going to please everybody.
Yeah.
And we work in this subjective thing where what I like may not be what you like. And it just happens. And I think it's important not to beat yourself up over, well, that guy didn't like my stuff. And now I'm going to go home and cry because he didn't like the way I made the hi-hat sound. And,
well, the flip side of that, too, is that you're going to have those sessions where everybody loved what you did, but you don't like what you did, and you're going to make yourself cry when
That's
you go
the
home.
Story of my life. I'm so self-critical of everything that's plagued me my whole life.
Yeah, I think that's an important skill because it's just the artist in us. If we weren't self-critical, we wouldn't try and keep improving on the next session.
Right, and I think that's what keeps. It's like, okay, well, this time I really like this, but that was not good at all. So on the next week, it keeps you like, okay, I'm going to change something up on the next time.
Yeah.
But I think if you get complacent, you're like, oh, I just love everything I do. You're not really trying to change anything. I don't know.
Let's keep talking about guitars. So we talked about, making sure the guitar sound is coming great out of the amp. What about the miking of the guitar amps? What are some favorite things you like to do?
Man, as dumb as it sounds, I really like an SM57 on a guitar speaker. As simple as that is, it always sounds like a guitar to me. I'd like to if I'm miking a 412 cabinet, I might put 4 mics, like a mic on each speaker, so I can, what's working? Is this one working? Is that one working? If it sounds weird, I'll go move it,
Do you find it's useful to have those mics live together as part of the final recording, or do you find that there's a benefit to just using a single mic rather than a blend of mics?
I think there's cases for both. For certain parts, you might add that second mic in, and then it's like too thick, or it's too and something, and then you mute that, and you just have the one mic, and it's like, but that works. So I think it's a case by case thing. I think for big main guitars, I like to blend a couple mics because, I like the sound of the high end of this one, and I like the low end that this one is adding when I creep it in there. And I like the character of this one just a little bit. And I like to do that kind of fast.
Yeah.
And not think about it too much.
So I used to have my MCI console in there, and one of the things I used the mix bus for was guitar stuff, where I'd put up a handful of mics out there and bring them up on faders, and you can readjust them quick,
right?
Mute them, go with different combos, and it was amazing how quickly you could come up with something that way that was hard to do if you kept them all separated in Pro Tools. Do you like to do those blends with the console? Do you find a console is really useful in that situation, or can you still do it in Pro Tools?
I prefer to do it on the console. If for some reason I don't trust the buses on the console, then I'll print them separately, just out of my like, you know what I mean? If you're working somewhere that you never worked before, and you may notice some weird thing, like when I put it up this bus, there's something not right about this
right,
bus.
So you're afraid you might be getting a blend you like, but you're afraid the final version of that blend is something's getting lost through the bus. But while you're listening, you're probably just listening to the one track in Pro Tools.
Correct.
That the bus is going to.
Correct.
Yeah, that I've dealt with that with mixers too.
And so, I even have like a little sound workshop console that I use when I'm recording guys like in non-studio environments, that I've determined the buses sound decent enough where I'm comfortable busing a couple guitar mics to a single track. And I think it's really easy to do it that way, because you can solo or mute one and then just blend it in, and really quickly, that's the sound I like. Let's go with that.
Yeah. I mean, the value of having the faders right there is really cool, because you don't think about it. You just adjust a little bit until it's good. And sometimes even, like you turn both faders, it's the same blend, but you just turn them down a little bit and it sounds better. Sometimes you just jack them up, it sounds better. Sometimes you just push them all the way up.
Right.
And, I did a lot of that where that blend was mono as it came out of the console, and it went through like an 1176, and that got printed. Do you find that compression is helpful in that realm too? Or do you, because that's another part of the guitar question I have for you, because these guitars are so heavy.
Right.
Are they already limited just because of the sound itself?
Yeah, I think like most of the time when I like to record heavy, like big modern high gain stuff, I don't use a lot of compression or any at all on the guitars. Even in the mix stage, I won't put it on there because I don't feel like it needs it. Sometimes I'll use a compressor just for a tonal thing. Like it might not even be doing any gain reduction, but it's adding some sort of character, like an 1176 or a LA2A or something like that.
Yeah, they really do have different tones. 1176 has got a little bit of a mid-range.
Yeah,
that just brings
exactly.
the sound forward. What about compressors with transformers? Does that sometimes do a good thing?
Yeah, like I think like an LA2A or something, it has just a different, but I don't always have that kind of stuff available to me. So it's like,
and again, with those things, you just try it and you just plug it in. How's this sound good? Does that sound good?
Right.
Oh, that sounds better. Let's do that.
Right. And I don't like to spend too much time questioning, does it sound good? Because if the artist is there, it's like, well, let's go. It sounds good. Let's go.
Right. Yeah.
And just making sure all the mic pre-gains are set right, and I'm getting a clear signal out of the amp, and I like the mics that I'm using. I'll use compression if it's like a clean part, or if there's delays I want to get to speak better or stuff like that.
Yeah. Does the compression come into play at the mix? Is this more like a get a good, clean, solid recording, and it may still need compression at the mix? Or do you find that, again, even mixing heavy music, the compression is built into the sound already?
When I'm mixing it, I don't use compression on like the main stuff. If it's a part that I need to let it speak or stand out, I might add compression to that. Like if it's a lead part or a melody or something like that. But as far as the big guys go, if I am using compression, it's very light.
Yeah. I remember Brad Jones, who was my mentor at Alex the Great, once he told me, I was thinking about compression on guitar, and he was just like, oh, we're not going to need any compression that. It's already so distorted.
Right.
It's compressed already.
And I've experimented with all kinds of compression on the big guitars, and I'm like, it just, I don't feel like I miss it when it's not there.
Well, and then there's that element that says, if you're thinking about it, what happens if you don't add compression, but you just simply turn up the volume knob one more click on that guitar?
Exactly.
Is that all you need? Is that what you were wanting, is just that thing? So now that's the other side of this question of loud records and rock records. Talk about the zone that this record lives in as the listener experience. So, and sounds like a loaded question, because it is. Some records are meant to be cranked up when you listen to them.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yes.
And so talk about that. Like how do you think about that? How does that affect some decisions you make about, things like low end and high end on a record even?
Oh, well, for me, I want to be able to crank it loud and it not hurt.
Right.
So that is going to require some sorting out of the high end, the cymbals, the high end on the guitar, the vocal. I mean, and it's all case by case. It's like, I'm going to have to go in there and deal with that. If I'm mixing it, I'm going to have to deal with that, because I want to hear all of it, but I don't want it to hurt me when I crank my stereo.
Right. And so what's implied in that statement is the idea that it doesn't hurt at a lower volume.
Correct.
Right? And so where it can kind of bite you in the ass is the fact that you might not notice it. Yeah, I mean, I won't notice it.
Right.
In fact, I might even think it sounds cool at the low volume.
Right. And for me, it's all about like, I still go to my car every couple hours with what I'm working on and just drive around, because that's how I listen to records, is drive around in my car with it cranked.
Yeah. And do you use any particular tools for playing that in your car, or do you just sort of bounce an MP3 or a wave and then?
I have a system that I use I'll upload it to my Dropbox, and then I'll download it to the phone, because for some reason the playing out of Dropbox it doesn't sound right to me. But if I save it to the phone and then play it back, it sounds more like what I thought it should sound like. Yeah,
Dropbox is notorious for.
And I thought I was crazy for the longest time. I'd hear these things and I'd go back in and I'd chase them. And I'd be like, I just don't hear it in here. Is there something wrong with my speakers? Is there something wrong with my ears? Is there something wrong with... But I would hear these sounds, like sometimes there would be like these little pops. And I'd be like, where is that coming from? I'd go look for an edit. And I was like, there's no edits there. I've been over it 1,000 times. And then I saved it to the phone. I was like, I don't want to play it back on a different playback. And it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. And I talked to somebody else who had the same experience. And I was like, okay, so there is an issue with playing it out of Dropbox.
Have you explored stuff like Samply?
I haven't, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
So it's handy because it'll stream it at the high quality for you, so that it doesn't get that Dropbox screw up. That's
probably what, because, saving it to the, it's this extra step, and it's like, oh, I got to save it to the phone and then do this. But that's how that's become my process. And things will reveal themselves, and I'll try to deal with them. It's hard to get things loud and clear and not hurt, but because you still want it to be bright and you still want it to be, and then you still have to think about, somebody's going to master it and what's that going to do to it.
And what's funny about that too is that it's hard for me to make the same decision in the control room that I'm making in the car.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah, it's like, and even I've got incredible speakers, but I think there's a quality to cranking it in the real world, which is like the car. It's really the car. I didn't even have another place that I crank music anymore. Used to be a jam box, maybe.
Right.
But in the car, and I think that the car system, buckles under pressure in a certain way or something that maybe reveals harshness too. And that's your things. And sometimes in the studio system's too good, and it won't buckle under pressure. And so you might not think it's causing issues.
It's interesting that you say that, because I've noticed that too. And I'm always like, I don't know why. It just is.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. But it is frustrating because we'll always be stuck in that place where it's like, you gotta pause, take it out to the car, listen to it, and then come back in, and and it's a delayed feedback loop.
It is,
and and inevitably you go through a thing where you're like, I wish I could just be in the car and make the damn adjustment right then and there, so I can decide if I like it better or not.
Yeah, because I just got to get done with this thing so I can move on to the next one. But to me, I've started to look at it as like a change in perspective, because I've been sitting in front of these two speakers for hours, and now I'm going to go out and drive around, and it's a little bit of a shift, and it helps me to, when I do come back, okay, now I know what I got to do.
Yeah, and so then back in the studio, when I'm like, okay, I had this experience in the car, I'm coming back to the studio, I definitely hear some stuff in the studio, but I don't hear it in the same way.
Right, exactly.
I don't necessarily hear it as the same problem. But the way that I find it's really useful to, or it's really helpful to solve a problem in the studio is the reference track.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the reference track comes in so handy to me. It's like using, right now I'm using metric AB.
Oh yeah, I love that one. That's what I use.
I'll just load up the alternate versions, even the mix, even if I'm like making a change to a mix and trying to tweak it, critical to load in the mix I just heard in the car, so that I can AB it against that and go like, okay, now I'm hearing where I'm making that change in the mids or the highs or the volume or the whatever.
And you can like you can isolate just the sub and listen and go, okay, I made this change. So how's it? Like, I know there's an issue down there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just did this. Now, how is that translating to the old one?
Yeah. And then another trick that can be helpful in the car, because sometimes I'm sometimes it's hard to train yourself to think about the right frequencies. And you think something's low when it's actually like 100 hertz or something like that.
Right.
And so what can be fun in the car is you actually take like one of those signal generator apps, load it up on your phone, and sweep through the frequencies in your car and just listen and just be like, you just sweep down in the low range and then you're like, oh, it just disappears after 70 or something.
Right. I should probably do that.
Or you surprise yourself and you're like, damn, my car, I can hear all the way down to 30 sine wave, and it just helps a little bit as far as like mentally understanding what your car is doing.
What you're dealing with.
Yeah, like you sweep up to 100 and you hear it there and you're like, oh, that's really the frequency I'm hearing in the bass guitar or whatever.
Right.
That kind of stuff. Drums. I said I was going to come back to drums. So one of the things I notice on these records you're doing is powerful, powerful drums. They have to punch through other sounds. And there's parts where maybe the toms and the kick are landing together.
Oh, yeah.
Playing a particular part. Have you found that like at first you might think, oh, they're flamming, so we should line them up. Did you ever go through that where you lined up the toms and the kicks?
Yeah, I've never
experienced that really didn't sound like what you thought they were going to sound like.
I think I just hit this mic.
That's all right. We love it when you hit the mic. Hit it again.
I don't ever move things within itself, if that makes sense. Like I'm not going to move just the tom.
Right. Because
over the kick drum
kit.
Right.
It's not going to sound right.
You could probably get away with it. It's just like one of those things. It's like, oh, that's illegal. But what I do is, let's say if it's like kick and snare hitting together and there's one or two that are really wide, I'll find one that's right on and I'll paste that.
Right. So like if it's a 4 on the floor kick part and the snare's landing. Yeah. Well, so let's just throw it out there, man. Where's the most likely place that the kick and the snare are going to flam in a rock record that it's screwing things up and you need to go find a replacement? This is a trick question, but I'm curious if the first thing comes to mind for you too.
Well, it's like anytime that 4 on the floor is hidden in the chorus and sometimes you don't hear it until the vocals after the vocals added and you're just listening and then you hear one that you don't, sometimes I won't register it as a flam. I just know that hit doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, where else are they hitting it? But then you got to think about all the cymbal bleed. So you have to find one that's hit in the same relationship as that crash cymbal was hit the beat before. So you got to find one that has a crash cymbal the beat before. So you have that same background information. So it sounds like they played it that way. So it doesn't sound like you pasted something.
Yeah, because when you paste the wrong one and you learn the hard way that like, oh, the cymbals just went
yeah, exactly.
Right there,
Exactly.
And then just to make you feel even better about all this hard work you're doing, this is before they replace all the drums with triggers anyway.
Right.
With samples in the mix. Well, so the place that it always hit me is in the drum fills.
Oh yeah.
Drum fill, like, the beat, the verse beat is going along and a lot of times the kicks and the snares don't land at the same time. But then along comes the fill going into the chorus. And now there's this loose ass sloppy kick landing right in, like, what's it doing right there,
Yeah. And sometimes there's nothing you can do because you love the fill or whoever loved that fill. And that's the only time they played that fill and you make the best of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of these things that we worry about that it's like, I hear it every time. And then nobody ever hears it.
Yeah.
It's just a great song.
Well, so part of my question that was a little loaded was the times where we layered toms on top of each other, overdubs.
Oh, yeah.
We were like, and I tried lining them all up. And then I was like, why does this not sound bigger?
Right.
And then you learn that there's power in sounds that are sort of flammed out a little bit.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, I've went through that exact same thing. It's like, oh yeah, we did all these tom overdub. Now we're gonna line them up tight to the drums, and what happened?
It just sounds like a big one tom going like boom that you need to EQ like crazy.
Exactly, and then you figure out, oh, they're supposed to be flamming.
That's what makes it sound cooler. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I realize that part of the reason why that's what makes it sound better is because loudness is a combination of things. It's actual volume of something, it's harmonic overtones of something, and it's sound over time.
Right.
So sound over time means that, if you have a kaboom happening of a bunch, 4 drum hits, when they're flamming, it's actually a longer amount of time that you're hearing the attacks of those sounds happening.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense that would sound more powerful than if they all land simultaneously.
Yeah, and your initial thought is they got to hit together, and that's going to be huge. And
right.
And then it's not. It's one of those like
fascinating. It's
weird
fascinating stuff that you have to like, and you kind of have to go through all the hard ass work. And I mean, drum editing, for me to go through the drums and tighten them all up and edit them and get all the fills right, on a record with a band like the Living Things back in the day. Before we could start adding the guitars, I mean, that was like an 8-hour day of just the drums on the one song.
Yeah.
Just to get them to the point of being ready to.
It's a process.
Record on top of.
If I'm going to edit a track of drums, I've gotten it down to about, I can get most songs done in like 2 hours. But that's everything.
Yeah.
Some songs, like if it's that's going to take longer.
So Beat Detective is your friend?
No, I don't use beat. I just do everything by hand.
Oh, so you just move individual things, or you look for a bar?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you do it? So if you're doing it by hand, let's talk about that. So you're chopping up. Where are some of the chops going?
Sometimes at every beat.
So the kick that's digga 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 digga. It's like each of those duh.
Yeah,
and then the guh.
It's just like how tight if it's like a super precise record, sometimes you got to make that super precise. And
right, but then are you moving each of those hits by hand right to the grid?
Yeah.
Or do you sometimes like fudge it close and go like, I'm going to leave these loose? What's a good way to think about that?
Well, for me, it's just a lot of listening, because like I'll finish a section and then go back and listen and go, okay, well you can't do that because now the hi-hat's a little squirrely.
Right.
So it's that's why I don't use Beat Detective, because I don't want a computer to tell me, well, this is where it goes and this is where this goes. And because
you hear that, Rockstars? This is one guy who's not afraid of AI. Fuck AI.
So, it's like, what is he playing? And that's kind of going to determine how I edit. Like if it's a shuffle, I'm probably not going to really edit that, because to me, that's where a lot of the personality of the drummer is coming out. And if you start messing with those in-between beats, it really kind of kills the thing that he had going on.
All right. So the other part that makes this question and answer tough is, so now you're in the same way that you learn you're not supposed to mix the drums in solo. You're not supposed to mix the perfect snare and then add it into the rest.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it sound right? When you're editing drums, to a certain extent, you're editing in solo.
Yeah.
Because now we've sort of muted everything else. And if we unmuted it, it wouldn't sound right anyway because it's not in the pocket.
Right.
With these edited drums. So what are some ways that you make the right decisions about those drums? You just sort of trust your gut?
Yeah.
Okay. And then do you find that like later, like you just like verse 1 just sounds better than verse 2. So let's just copy and paste. Let's just make verse 2 the same as verse 1 for these drums.
Sometimes that happens, or sometimes I'll get to verse 2 and realize, oh, this is the way I should have done it. And then I'll go back to verse 1 and fix that.
Yeah.
It's a process. It's like, it's not a mindless process. Whereas you forget, like sometimes it's like, I just go through these motions and I hit this button, slide this here, slide. But you really got to pay attention to what's happening there, because you don't want to destroy it. And, And also you don't want to waste a bunch of time.
Yeah. So you got to mentally sort of have to stay musically engaged. Like you're in performance mode the whole time.
Kind of.
Yourself.
Yeah.
Because how do you stay in that mode? How do you stay in the not distracted mode? Do you catch yourself zoning out and then, you give yourself the break right then or something?
Man, I'm bad about taking breaks. I like to wear headphones when I do it because it shuts everything out. I don't like to hear like people talking or somebody walking behind me because that'll disrupt my whole thing. So if I'm in like edit mode, I'm in headphones.
It's interesting. Do you find that the headphones also let you listen deeper into the track and hear stuff that like it's easier to hear that you're screwing the shuffle up or something?
Maybe. It's just, it came about as out of necessity because I'd be in an edit room that didn't have speakers and okay, I'm wearing headphones. And then now I feel like I'm doing something wrong if I don't have my headphones on.
Yeah,
it's like, I'm so comfortable with that. Even I was at another studio and somebody had these really nice open back headphones and they were showing them to me and they were like, yeah. And I was editing for them and they came in, I was wearing my headphones and they go, well, you didn't like my headphones? I was like, no, I just feel comfortable with these. These are the ones I always have.
How loud do you have your headphones?
Man, too loud. Too loud. It dawned on me that I listened to them too loud because, the headphones will just wear your ears out quick. And the way I discovered that is I'll be in there editing and you don't realize how loud it's getting over time. Like I'll start with it low and then, oh yeah, these drums sound great. Right. I'm gonna click it up a little. Now they sound even better. I'm gonna turn it up a little. Now they sound really good. But then, okay, I got to go get a guitar sound for these guys now. And I walk out and I hear the speaker and it sounds weird to me. And it's like, oh, because I've been hammering my ears with these closed back headphones. And so I'm kind of conscious of keeping things way lower now because if you're working a 14-hour day and you just wore your ears out an hour or two, then it's going to be a long, painful day.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think about. So there are times where I need to go out and listen to the guitar amp.
Right.
And I learned this one from Bill Skibby, who need to get you on the show, at Key Club Recording. He had earmuffs, like the gun range earmuffs, hanging by the door as you walked into the live room. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. So I started getting those for the studio. And it's like, I got a bunch of pairs, and I tell my interns, I'm like, I need you out there, but grab the gun muffs, you know.
It's important. And that's one of the things when I first started working with Nick is he had those gun muffs everywhere. And it's like, what do I have these for? It's like, oh yeah, when I need to go out and move a mic, put these on.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you forget and it is not a good thing when you forget. And even if you tell the guitar player, hey man, I'm going to go move this mic. I forgot my things. Can you just not play for a second? They're going to play. They're going to play
one note.
As soon as you put your head next to the amp, they're going to play it.
And it's like, the nice thing about wearing the earmuffs is you can lean right in and adjust the snare mic and they don't have to stop. It doesn't bother you. It's okay. I mean, I wouldn't do it all day long, but but the drummer is. But with the guitar amps though, you kind of do have to do naked ear sometimes. For a bit. And I think it's really smart to remember that it's okay to do that. I mean, I'm not doing 110 decibels, 120 decibels of guitar.
Right.
Some amps might be that loud, but you can do really loud in brief bits if you're careful and smart about it. And so allowing yourself, recognizing that you get this brief moment to make a choice on it and make a decision, and then stop, cover your ears up. Don't stay in that zone. Because again, you need to go out to the control room and listen to the speakers, like you just said, and have a fresh ear for the speakers so you can tell what you're hearing, right?
Because if you just spent too long out there, now your ear's kind of fatigued already, and then you go in and you're not really hearing it. It just sounds bizarre because it's like, what? That's it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's we think about everything so technically sometimes, but like the technicality of why it sounds different to you and why you can't judge it is irrelevant. The relevant thing is you just don't know what the hell you think right now.
Exactly. And it took me a while to realize what was happening. And early on I'd be like, oh yeah, we just twist these knobs till it sounds good. and you're compensating for something that's not really happening. It's just happening because you overexposed your ears for a minute.
Right. So much of what we do in the studio is just we're making moves until we hit a point of confidence. And the reason why we have confidence is because we grew up listening to music. Mm-hmm. So we're confident. It's that whole like Ira Glass quote about like you start out with an advanced appreciation of something, but it takes a body of work before you know how to create that something that you appreciate.
Right.
And I think that that's true for all of us going into this. Like when we're young, we develop an advanced taste in music, pretty advanced. I mean, we got a lot of room to grow.
Right.
But we know what we think and we know what we like, and we know when we hit that experience of like, hell yeah, and then we learn how to make some moves in the studio. And when we make those moves, we're just trying to hit that point of hell yeah. And as soon as you hit hell yeah, hopefully if you're smart, you stop fucking with it.
Right. And I've learned that, my kind of marker for that is when the producer says, oh, sounds great, man. That's my cue to stop.
Yeah, me too.
Because if I don't stop, I will tweak all day long. And by the end of the day, it's like, well, why didn't it sound as good as it sounded at the beginning of the day?
Right. And here's the part of that question. When the producer says it sounds great, did it sound great to you as the engineer?
Probably.
It's always
probably
no.
not.
It's always no. The answer is always no, because we're always like, what can I do next?
Exactly.
How can I improve this?
It's almost like you're touching stuff to justify them paying you for the day, and you got to get over that. Like, no, it sounds good. Stop.
Yeah.
And knowing when to let go, and well, this guy is paying me and he said it sounds good. And I gotta sort of trust that because I'm so far in it at this point. I'm zoned in on like, the hi-hat or this crash cymbal hit that sounded weird. And it's like the forest for the trees kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to train ourselves to listen to these incredible details, like the cymbals changed slightly when that snare edit went in there.
Right.
But it's hard to let go of that way of listening.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it takes us 6 months after a finished record before we can just listen like a listener.
And the thing I always say is like, it's hard for me to listen to records that I worked on because I never get to hear them for the first time. Like,
right, exactly.
Somebody who just bought the CD. I know that doesn't happen anymore. You don't go to the store and buy a CD, but when you used to get the record and come home and put it on, this is the first time you're hearing it as a fan. But hopefully other people have that experience.
Yeah, like you rock stars. That's why you're going to go listen to Nathan's playlist in the show notes and hear all his records for the first time because they sound killer. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. So the earmuffs, another place that I feel like is worth adding. I've learned that when you're going to do guitar overdubs in the control room, it's a very familiar experience as a rock producer or rock engineer, particularly. So there you are. Guess who's closest to the speakers?
Yeah.
You, the engineer.
Yeah.
And guess who wants the speakers cranked up? Actually, I find sometimes it's me, the engineer, that cranks up the speakers more than the guitar player actually needed it.
Right. I do the same thing. I mean, sometimes it's just like you want to get that energy going.
Well, and again, this needs to be crankable. So you want to know if the guitar sounds good when it's cranked.
Exactly. And also, guitar players are used to standing in front of cabinets. They're used to a massive amount of sound. And then you get in the control room, you got like a little 8-inch speaker. And it's like,
right.
It's hard for me to give you the experience of standing in front of your amp without you standing in front of your amp.
Well, that's the moment for the big speakers in the studio.
Right.
Even if they're not your favorite mix speakers.
Exactly, yeah.
They can be for that overdub experience. And what I've learned to do is same thing we said about the amp. I bring in the earmuffs into the control room and I make the decision on the sound. And then I realized I was like, why am I subjecting my ears to this volume now that we're just doing takes? We're just listening for, was it in tune? Was it in time?
Right.
There's nothing else I'm not going to do any more tweaks.
Right.
So bam, put on the earmuffs and block everything out so that you can survive that onslaught of sound. Another strategy that really helps me is I'll do a laptop and screen share the main computer. So now I can step away and go to the back of the control room.
Nice.
So that I'm like not getting pummeled.
Yeah, I'm learning things from you.
Yeah, so maybe that's why we talk about that stuff. It's fun,
Because there's those days where you're up there in the guitars and bass, and it's just like, at the end of the day, I mean, your ears are ringing, and
bass is tough because you almost kind of have to listen because you're listening for. You're making sure that it's got all that huge bassness.
That and the tuning, and it's so low. It's like you're really concentrating really hard on, okay, is it in tune?
Yeah. Well, if you're doing drop tuning records.
Oh, yeah. And these bands are tuning lower and lower and lower.
So now do you guys use the Evertune bridges? Is that a common thing in your world too?
It's becoming more common. And we first got introduced to those when we were working on a record for the band Rise Against. They had them, and they had been touring with them. And me and Nick kind of looked at them like,
what's this
stuff?
It's
it's kind of like, I'm not messing with that. It's going to change the tone of the guitar. But it didn't. And I think it's like a week into guitars, and we kind of looked at each other, and we had the realization that we haven't spent any time tuning. And you know that whole thing where there's days where you're tuning all day.
Yeah, the strobe tuner is sitting on the console and it's shedding a tear. It hasn't been used.
And we just realized it. So Nick he got a couple of his guitars outfitted with Evertunes, and so we use them all the time. It's like when I'm working with him, it's like if there's a part that's tricky and we're having a problem with tuning, like there's a Les Paul with an Evertune, there's this guitar with an Evertune, there's that guitar with an Evertune.
So my understanding of them is it's a bridge modification, and you tune the note, you tune the string, and what it does is it somehow compensates the tension of the string to make sure that string always has the same tension, or
right?
Something like
and
that.
I'm not
like if you try and bend the note, it adjusts to keep the string in tune.
Correct. And I'm not I don't know all the details about it, because usually there's a guitar tech that knows it, and he's like, oh yeah, I've set this up. But there's a system of pulleys in there that keep it in this sort of zone. There's like 3 zones. There's one that you can't bend it, and there's one that you can't. You can put it in a mode where you can bend it.
Oh, so you could Evertune a guitar, and then you're like, yeah, but I want to play blues on today, and I don't care about the tuning, and will it actually let certain strings bend?
Yes,
the
so
other
you
ones
can.
stay? Amazing.
You can let the top 3 strings bend and the bottom 3 strings stay. So like if you're doing a lot of chord work, but then you're doing a couple little like licks that you want to bend. So you can set it up for that.
And is it a major modification to the guitar?
It is. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think they have to cut like a big piece out.
So you probably dedicate a guitar to this as opposed to just saying,
and probably not like a 59 Les Paul.
Right.
You wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
But I wouldn't put like your most prized guitar up for that. But
well, it's amazing in my experience, without even doing much of the drop tuning stuff. I was amazed at how quickly tuning becomes an integral part of what the sound is you're creating when you're, I'm not going to say a problem or an issue. I'm just going to say it's like, it's as important as it gets when you're layering guitars, because if they're not, and it's hard to even explain like why this is in tune versus isn't. It's like, it's just power chords are so freaking hard to get in tune. And then like the tuner says it's fine. But your ears tells you it's not.
I've had that debate with so many guitar players. It's like, I hear it and I'm like, man, I think your third string, like, can you just check that for me? And they're like, it's fine.
Why is there a third string in a power chord anyway?
and they'll check it and I'm like, well, fret on that string. And it'll be like a couple cents sharp. And it's like, I can hear that.
Well, and then there's the thing where so rock stars, if you're not familiar with a power chord, it's just the root and the fifth. Right. Most of us probably are. But you can check that on the tuner. You could play it by yourself, You're like, even to your ear, you're like, they're in tune, they're in tune. And then you go do eighths and you're downstroke eighths and you're like, it's not in tune.
Yep.
So there's like even this instant moment of the attack of the note. And like, sometimes you have to adjust the tuning.
Exactly.
So that just that power eighth part sounds in tune through a section.
Exactly.
And then the bridge comes and they're long notes and now you got to go back to the other way it was.
Right.
And it's like, you learn this stuff just of doing so many overdub sessions and it's crazy. And it's like some guitars do it effortlessly. Some don't do it. Sometimes it's just the distortion you're getting out of the amp that's never going to let this guitar sound in tune.
Right. There's always that one interval that's never going to be quite. It's one of those things that if you never thought about it and you never noticed tuning, it's not going to bother you. But once you hear it and you notice it, then that's all you hear whenever it happens. So that's out of tune. That's out of tune. That's out of tune.
And there's a great expression that so we use the 12-tone scale. The typical version of that is called equal tempered tuning, which is each note is the same distance from the next note. It's like an even division across the octave. And the great expression is everything is equally out of tune. Right. And when you start thinking about it like that, you realize. And when we tune by ear, we actually don't tune in equal tempered. We start hearing perfect fourths and perfect fifths. And I think that's what plays into doing heavy, heavy records. Not even as heavy as yours, just rock stuff with power chords. Because you've got like your ear is tuning into like, okay, we want that fifth to sound really perfect. And it sounds better to my ear in this moment.
Right.
But then like some distortions bring out the thirds and those overtones and they start sounding wacky.
Exactly.
And I've got a little amp called a True Tone down. There's this tiny little amp and you play a power chord into it and you hear like a major third.
Huh.
And I'm like, holy shit, this one amp just like brings out the major third overtone. And it's trippy.
And then sometimes it's like, well, this time you played the chord, it sounded great. So I'm just going to take that time.
Yeah, just copy paste.
Put it over, not tell anybody. Because, sometimes you don't want to beat the guy or girl who's playing up. You beat them up as much as you can, but they're going to get worn out when you keep stopping. Hey, check your tuning, check your tuning, check your tuning, check your tuning.
Now, do you punch in a lot with players like that, or is it a lot of takes and comping?
It just depends on the artist, I think. I've done people that want to do the whole song, or sometimes we'll do the whole song and then I'll make mental notes of okay, I need to go back and get that first verse, or I need to get that first chorus, or maybe we'll focus in on the verse or the chorus, or let's get all the big parts, and then we need a different sound for the verse. So let's go back. We'll get that later.
Yeah, and then if it's a band like Code Orange, you've also got the parts that go. I
mean,
like 2 bars. It's like 3 harmonizing perfect fifth guitar parts.
With that band,
It's wacky.
Almost all the rules are out the window. Reba is phenomenal at getting those sounds. And sometimes it's just sitting there and recording just sound, this sound, that sound, this sound. And then you sort of give it to them and then they arrange it in a way
that's the whole dubstep analogy to me. I think that they're like
right.
kind of, you know,
and then
thing coming out of a guitar.
If you're not familiar with how they're going to do it, you're like, it's really confusing because you're like, what are we doing?
Right.
But then when you know, well, I know I'm just capturing this stuff and then they're going to make something really great out of it.
Yeah.
And when you hear it, you're just like, oh my God, how did...
Now, do you ever have any bands that actually take the guitar sounds and they go into samplers and play back from a sampler? Or is it almost always, we're just going to edit and place sounds and parts and stuff?
I think these days it's more editing and placing because it's so easy with software. It's just right there. And everybody has their own rigs now. Everybody has this with Logic or this with Ableton or I got Pro Tools. And so sometimes you just give it to them because they know what they want to do.
Yeah. Dude, we've been going a good long clip, man. We're in the overtime zone. So we didn't even talk about vocals, but just before we go, if the rock stars need to get one vocal mic to do heavy records,
SM7.
There you go. I knew it. I knew it was going to be the SM7.
And pretty much also, if you're not in a big room, great room, the SM7 is going to be your friend because it's not going to pick up all.
Block out.
Yeah, it just.
What
works.
about the that thing? What's that?
Probably the same thing. And
SM7. Is it just like, is that like just a technique? What do you guys even call that? The low growl?
I don't even know what they call it, but that and put some distortion on it.
Distortion is part of that. That's your friend on vocals for that stuff.
I'll just I don't even have a favorite one. It just depends on the person and the way they're doing it. It's like you might go through 3 of them and be like, that's the one, that's the one.
And singers that are doing these heavy vocals, is it, do you have a nice proper mic stand and are they singing with their hands perfectly positioned? And,
it's all over
like they're in a wedding party
all over the map.
Or are they just holding it in their hand and just yelling into it?
I've done it every way, whatever they want to do, I usually will not use it. Sometimes on guys that are singing and doing that, we'll use a nicer mic for the singing. And then, I've got the other mic. Okay, now scream into that one as loud as you can. And, don't have to worry about the capsule collapsing and all that. And
what we would call scream vocals, are they always actually loud in the room? Or are they sometimes quiet and it's just the way, like, are these growls quieter than you think ever?
For most of the stuff that I've worked on, they're usually generally loud, but there are some guys that will do them real quiet and then
you just crank it up with the effects. Yeah. It's cool stuff. All right. Well, so I'm going to ask you this next question. This is typically our closing question.
Oh, yes.
And we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Right.
And you get to go back in time and find young Nathan, who's, I don't know, maybe you're recording into your 4-track thinking, this is pretty cool. That'd be fun to do. Were you
Why
into
can't I
rock
do stereo?
then? Were you doing like distorted guitars into your 4-track?
I don't even remember what I was doing.
You were like, I just want to play steel drum into my 4-track.
I don't even think I knew what that was back then.
Right. And then so you go back and find yourself at that young age and you say, listen, buddy, you may not have a motorcycle mustache and long hair like I do right now, but one day you will. And here's some advice for you. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you give yourself?
Oh, I think I would just tell myself to relax and that it's going to be okay.
That seems like it worked, man. You seem pretty relaxed.
I seem like it, but inside it's a whole different
it's a
story.
Shit show.
No, I think, when I first started, I was just very high strung and concerned about what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this? And people that know me will probably laugh because they'll be like, oh yeah, he's totally that way.
Yeah.
But I would just tell myself, it's going to be okay. It's going to work out.
Well, it's not. No, I'm just kidding. No, it is. Yeah. I mean, it's just a good attitude to have for records and life.
Yeah. I mean,
even the career of doing this, like how many times have you ever thought, fuck, is this going to work?
Yeah. I wake up every morning with that thought. It's like, what? All right, I guess we'll try again today.
And it's good to have that attitude of, you know what, I feel like part of it is you just do it for a while and then you're like, well, one day you're like, well, if I rewind, I was worried I would like, how in the world could I do it? And yet here I am today and I did it. So I'm just going to project that forward and just figure out, you know what, I guess down the road, I'll be there too. So I'm going to quit worrying about it.
Right. And it's easier said than done, but I'm getting to that point where it's like, it's been working. So maybe we don't have to worry about that. All the stuff.
Yeah. So now next step is, how do I tell my sleeping brain that?
Oh yeah. That's a whole different podcast.
Probably meditation. We'll do a meditation podcast next. Awesome to have you here, dude.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, and it's fun to just hang out and talk about all this stuff. And we need to just make some rock records one day. But tell the rock stars, how can they go find more about you? Where do you want them to go check out your work? And then if they're just not ready to make the heaviest record they are made, what do they do?
NathanYarborough.com. It's just as simple as it gets website. It's got credits on there and a contact form. I'm on Instagram as well.
It's like Yar and then Burrough, spelled like Burrough, Borough.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I get people DM me through Instagram.
You live in my borough or you live in Yarborough? That's it right there.
Yeah. So pretty much just contact me through my website. I'm always ready to work on something.
Awesome, dude. Pleasure to have you here. Thanks for listening, Rockstars. Please do remember to listen to the music. It's in the playlist. Just go rock it out. You're going to enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. And, it's fun for me too, because I'm not typically somebody who listens to heavy, heavy records all the time.
Right.
But when I just pause and I'm just going to listen, I'm listening all the way through the song and check it out. And it's like, it's a trip, man. It's really cool stuff. You know? It's great to really expand my listening.
And it's very diverse. Sometimes you think of heavy music as, well, it's all this one thing, but there's such a wide scope.
Evanescence.
Yeah. From that to something else is such a shift.
Yeah. So wait, did you work on that big Evanescence hit that I remember, the first time they were on my radar? What was that, like early 2000s or something?
Bring Me to Life.
Yeah.
No, that would have been before my time.
That was before your time. Okay. All right. Well, no worries. Nathan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I look forward to seeing you around the studio, dude.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Lewitt, Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes below, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.